No one sat near her. Not in the mess hall. Not in briefing chambers. Not even in the docking bays where soldiers usually gathered in tense silence before deployment. She sat alone, and everyone was fine with that. Her name was Zyrith Balcora, though most simply called her the Widow. She was Virexian, and Virexians were the galaxy's apex predators. 8 feet tall, layered chitin armor fused to their skin. For luminous eyes that saw across spectrums most species couldn't even detect. Reflexes that made advanced combat AI look sluggish. She had ended the siege of Rast alone, single-handedly boarded a dreadnought and carved through 200 insurgents before venting the entire vessel into vacuum. The footage was required viewing in certain military academies. She was effective, efficient, unbreakable, and completely alone. The station. Fort Resolute wasn't built for comfort. It was a frontier military installation orbiting a dying red star, stationed at the edge of contested space. Multiple species served there under a unified defensive pact. Humans, Trelkani, Offri, even a handful of Virexians. But while cooperation existed, friendship did not. Not with her. Soldiers stepped aside when she entered a corridor. Voices lowered when she passed. Even seasoned commanders kept conversations brief. Because Virexians didn't socialize. They survived. And they killed. The rumor was that Zyrith had once eliminated an entire pirate fleet after they destroyed her broodclutch vessel. No survivors. No mercy. Just silence and debris. Whether that story was true or not didn't matter. Her eyes said enough. The human. I wasn't supposed to be there. My name's Marcus Hale. Human. Combat engineer. Transferred from Earth after the 3rd border skirmish in the Helix Drift. Fort Resolute was a punishment posting for some. For me, it was a chance to get away from politics. I didn't care about reputations. I cared about broken systems and malfunctioning defense grids. So when I walked into the mess hall my first night and saw an empty seat across from the most feared being on the station, I sat down. The silence. The reaction was immediate. Conversation stalled. Forks paused midair. Someone actually whispered, "Is he insane?" Zyrith didn't look up at first. She was eating something nutrient-dense and raw, suited to Virexian metabolism. After a few seconds, one of her upper eyes shifted toward me. Then another. Finally, all 4 fixed in my direction. "You are new," she said. Her voice was layered, low, textured, like gravel sliding over steel. "Yeah," I replied casually. "Marcus. You understand who I am. I've heard the highlights. And you still choose to sit here." Chair was open. Her lower pair of eyes narrowed slightly. A test. I focused on my tray. Soy protein slab. Rehydrated greens. Terrible coffee. After a moment, she returned to her meal. No threats. No violence. Just silence. I ate. Reputation and reality. Over the next few cycles, I kept sitting there. Not every meal. Just enough to make it clear it wasn't an accident. We didn't talk much at first. Sometimes not at all. But gradually, small exchanges began. "You repair the outer shield arrays," she observed one evening. "Trying to," I said. "They're a mess." "You recalibrated node 7 incorrectly yesterday." I blinked. "You were watching?" "I observe everything." I grinned. "Guess I'll double-check it." She didn't respond, but her bioluminescent markings flickered faintly. Virexian amusement, I would later learn. The truth about predators. The first real conversation happened during a power outage. A micrometeor strike disabled half the station's lighting grid. Emergency illumination cast long shadows across the corridors. I found her in an observation chamber overlooking the red star. You prefer darkness, I noted. I prefer clarity, she corrected. We stood in silence for a while. Then she said something unexpected. They believe I do not feel isolation. Do you? Her upper eyes shifted toward me. Virexians are born in clutches of 20 to 30. We fight for dominance early. Many do not survive. Sounds rough. It is normal. She paused. My clutch was destroyed during a territorial raid. I survived. The rumor was true. You lost all of them, I said quietly. Yes. And after that, I became efficient. Efficient. Not healed. Not stronger. Just efficient. That doesn't mean you don't feel it, I said. She didn't answer, but she didn't leave. The incident. 3 weeks later, Fort Resolute came under attack. Unknown signatures. Fast. Adaptive. The first strike disabled communications. The second breached Docking Bay 3. Panic spread quickly. Xyrith moved like lightning. She was in the thick of it within seconds, tearing through boarding drones with brutal precision. I was in engineering when the third strike hit. Structural collapse. Metal screamed. I was pinned beneath a fallen support beam. Alarms blared. Air pressure dropping. I tried to push the beam off. Didn't budge. Footsteps thundered down the corridor. For a split second, I thought it was over. Then she was there. Armor cracked. Bioluminescence flaring bright crimson. She assessed the situation instantly. You are trapped. Very observant. Without hesitation, she wedged herself beneath the beam. Muscles flexed. Chitin plate strained. And slowly, impossibly, she lifted. Move, she ordered. I crawled free just as the corridor behind us ruptured into vacuum. She sealed the breach manually, claws digging into emergency foam plating. By the time security forces regained control, the attackers were retreating. Fort Resolute survived. Barely. The aftermath. Medical teams treated the wounded. Xyrith refused assistance. I found her later in the same observation chamber. One of her arms was cracked along the chitin ridge. You're injured, I said. It is superficial. Doesn't look superficial. She didn't argue when I brought a repair kit. Virexian chitin could be sealed with polymer resin under heat. As I worked carefully along the fracture, she spoke. You should not have remained in engineering during the attack. Someone had to reroute power. You could have died. So could you. She went quiet. Then, I did not wish for that outcome. It wasn't a confession, but it was close. Breaking the myth. Word spread quickly across the station. The widow had pulled a human from certain death. The widow had held a collapsing corridor shut with her bare claws. The widow had allowed a human to repair her armor. Perceptions shifted. Slightly. Soldiers still respected her. Still feared her. But something else began to appear in their expressions. Understanding. She wasn't a monster. She was a survivor. And survivors sometimes carried silence like armor. The night of the Red Star. A few cycles later, we sat again in the observation chamber. The Red Star pulsed violently, solar flares dancing across its surface. You are different from other humans, she said. Good different or bad different? Uncertain. I laughed. Most people avoid me, she continued. You did not. I've met worse than you. She tilted her head slightly. Unlikely. Maybe, I admitted. But fear doesn't solve much. And what does? Showing up. She studied me with all four eyes. In Virexian culture, sitting beside a warrior in silence is a sign of acceptance. Guess I've been culturally respectful without knowing it. Her lower eyes softened, a subtle shift in light. You have altered my perception. Of humans, of solitude. that hit deeper than any battlefield moment. The real battle. The unknown attackers returned, this time with reinforcements. Fort Resolute couldn't hold alone. Evacuation protocols initiated, but retreat meant abandoning strategic territory. Xyrith volunteered to stay behind as rear guard. Of course she did. Alone and deadly. That was her reputation. I found her preparing in the armory. "You're not staying alone," I said. "This is not your fight. It is if I'm stationed here. You lack the physiology to survive prolonged exposure. I've surprised people before." She stepped closer, towering over me. "You do not understand Virexian final stand doctrine." "Maybe not," I said. "But I understand not leaving someone to die alone." Silence stretched between us. Finally, she nodded once. "Then we fight together." Holding the line, the battle was chaos. Explosions rocked the station. Hull fractures vented atmosphere. Energy bolts lit corridors in violent bursts. Xyrith was everywhere at once, tearing through enemy constructs with ferocity that bordered on myth. I rerouted defense grids, triggered emergency bulkheads, covered her blind spots when I could. At one point, she was overwhelmed by a wave of automated assault units. I dove into the fray with a plasma cutter, hardly a weapon, but enough to disable a joint here, sever a conduit there. Back to back, we held the choke point. Not graceful, not perfect, but unyielding. Reinforcements arrived just as our ammunition reserves dipped to critical. The attackers withdrew. Again. Fort Resolute still stood. The shift. After that battle, something changed permanently. In the mess hall, no one hesitated when I sat across from her. Sometimes others joined, not because they weren't afraid, but because fear wasn't the only thing she inspired anymore. She inspired respect, and maybe just a little connection. The conversation that mattered. Weeks later, during another quiet watch by the Red Star, she spoke softly. "In my species, bond is forged in combat or clutch." Yeah, I have neither remaining. I understood what she wasn't saying. "You don't have to be alone," I said. She looked at me, really looked. "I was alone and deadly," she said. "And now?" Her bioluminescence pulsed a soft, steady gold. "Now I am not alone." I leaned back in the observation seat. Guess that makes two of us. For the first time since I'd met her, she did something no one on the station had ever witnessed. She reached out, careful, deliberate, and rested one clawed hand lightly over mine. Not possession, not dominance. Contact. "I will fight beside you," she said quietly. "Good," I replied. I was planning on sticking around. Outside, the Red Star flared again, bright against the darkness. Fort Resolute remained on the edge of contested space. Danger never really left, but neither did we. She was still deadly, still efficient, still a legend. But now, she had someone who chose to sit with her. And sometimes, in a galaxy full of war and survival, that was the most powerful thing of all.